What I want to talk about now is just looking at some of the system configurations that should have already been implemented. Maybe they're missed along the way, a couple steps here and there. A couple key things you probably want to mark down and make sure that you have in place. What's going to happen next week is we're going to give you a chance to build a new system. We might end up just giving you a chance to kind of rebuild this system just to make sure everybody's in the same place. I'm seeing just slight variations, and some of those slight variations are kind of growing as far as bigger differences, and it's going to start running into some issues as we move forward, especially as we come naming with some things. So a couple things you need to do is make sure that your servers are named correctly. So if I look under configure this local server, if I click on configure this local server, I should see this computer called DC1. If it's named the very long naming thing, this is definitely an issue. When you're joining these computers or making domains, one of the first things that you get to do is, that's already for the domain, but you can see when I join the domain, you can also change the computer name. So I know that maybe your virtual machines aren't named correctly or whatever, which can be confusing in itself, but the computer name, the virtual machine itself, has to be named correctly to be consistent throughout the class. In real world, you can name anything you want, but probably something other than the default win whatever direct file computer name. So just be aware that when you join the domain, you can change the computer name right away. So when you're on that page, joining the domain, make sure your computers are named properly. So this one should be DC1. On DC2, I need to use sconfig. Well, there's a couple ways of doing it. With the command prompt, if I do sconfig, with just one S, I can see my computer name right here. I think it's host name from the command prompt will also tell me my computer name. So this needs to also be DC2. So you should specifically have it labeled DC1 and DC2. Same thing for your third server, configuring this local server. The computer name should be Data1. If we have other names in there, it's going to get a little bit weird, especially with the data server, because we'll be mapping to it, and you have to put the server name in the map command or the path, and if you have various names in there, it's not going to map the right drive letters. Okay, the next thing I want to talk specifically about is your file structure and your file rights. So if you could all go over to your data drive and open up File Explorer. This we will kind of go through together. You should have a D drive and the volume name is data. Now the volume name is not a big deal. It's just the volume name, but it definitely should be the D drive, and you should have these different folders underneath. We should have accounting. We were playing with the animals. That doesn't have anything to do with GOPA though, but executive, human resources, information systems, operations, sales, and shared. So these are the folders you should have on your D drive of your Data1 server. Even putting them on other servers, last week we were logging in to test users to see if they're the right rights or not. If you put it on DC1 or DC2, you couldn't log in. Users are not allowed to log into domain controllers. Data1 is part of the domain, but it's not a domain controller in itself. So therefore, users can log in to the Data1 server and see what files they have access to. So testing is being really, really important. Taking a look at the rights, I'm going to review this very specifically. If I right-click on the data drive itself, and I go to Properties, and then I go to Security, these are the rights that I should have. Everyone should have been there automatically, so is creator, owner, system, and administrator. So all these were here, in addition to another users group. And we leave everyone alone, but we get rid of users. The users group basically said you can read anything from any file on this drive. You can't write anything or delete anything, but it gave the default right was to be able to read anything everywhere. And you don't want all the users to read everything everywhere, so we want to get rid of that. There's other ways of dealing with this, at different levels. This is by far the easiest way of doing it. Just get rid of the users group only. So don't play with any of these rights for the administrator or the everyone group either. Don't try at this level to be a super secure admin by getting rid of the administrator shouldn't have access to that stuff. We don't have anybody else in place to take care of management right now. So if you get rid of administrator, you'll have a file system, but whatever's there is there. You can't delete it, you can't create it, you can't give other people permissions. You're just kind of stuck there. So be very, very careful. That is a potentially some organizations do that they don't want one person to have access to all the file systems. We're not anywhere close to that level, so leave the administrators group alone. Give them full control to everything and let it flow on through. So that's the root of the D drive. Then going through the different departments, if I right click on accounting and go to properties and then click on security, I should see these. Creator, owner, system, and accounting users, and administrators, we're all, if you notice that these are gray check marks, all these are inherited from the root. So there's inherited from the root, which is what you would expect, and that's what you want. The only additional user on here then should be the accounting users. Now, again, there's different ways of implementing this that are completely legitimate. And so we could put, accounts payables, account receivables, and the account managers in there, and that would work. We're going to continue building on this, though, and the building is going to assume or be based on that you have this specific right listed here. And again, not that you can't do it a different way, and when it comes final exam time, you can do it any way that works for you. The hard part is being able to demonstrate and teach. Everybody start with a different floor plan and we're going to build a house together. It's not going to work so well. So everybody works with the same floor plan. We build the same house. You get the techniques and skills down. Now when you go build your own house on your own, you can do it any way you want. But for class, sometimes I'm just making arbitrary decisions. This is just the way that I want to implement it, just so we can all build the same way. Okay, we'll just skip the animals. We're not really dealing with them. To the executive properties, security, again, we have the creator, owner, system, and administrators groups all inheriting their rights. And then adding executive users, which includes everybody, having the modify, read, and execute list folders read and write, which I consider to be read-write rights. So they can delete things, create things, modify the contents, read files, and execute things. HR is going to be identical. The only difference is that we have the HR users here instead. So we should have 4 objects there. IS should have 4 objects there with the IS users having modify rights. Under operations, we should have 4 entries in here with the operation users being included. And then sales, having the sales users being included. And then the shared. Shared, we want everybody in the domain. And again, there's a couple different ways of doing this. I believe that we just agreed on using the group called domain users. And giving domain users gives them everybody on the domain, access, full access, or read-write access to this shared folder. So what I want you to do is just take 5 minutes and make sure that you're in the right place for the right folders and the right rights. If you need to tweak anything or change anything, let's do that now, because we're going to build on that in just a minute. What we're going to talk about today then is being able to control these rights a little bit more. And again, there's multiple ways of dealing with this. But let's just take accounting, for example. Here's an example where we have a department that kind of has 2 subcategories, payables and receivables. And I'm not an accountant, but I kind of know that the people who get the money in a company shouldn't be the same people that spend the money in the company. You want to keep those kind of in checks and balances. And, you know, again, we're not getting into a finance or setting up the accounting department appropriately. We'll just use it as an example of being able to control rights. So let me bring up Notepad here. So let's just take a look at accounting. And so we have an accounting folder, which the access control list has the accounting users. And I'm going to abbreviate this again, of read, write, rights. So modified, read and execute, list folders, read and write. So it's the read, write rights. That flows down then automatically into any subfolders. So right now I have two that are created. So I have payables and I have receivables. But it could be anything. You know, it could be budgets. It could be, you know, inventory. A lot of times accounting departments are responsible for inventory and asset management and all that kind of stuff as well. So these rights dealing with the accounting users can read and write. It's going to come from there and flow down into there. In fact, we can even look at some of that. Let me flip back over here to my server, my data one. And so let's make some of those. I'm just going to make these. Just going to watch along. You have to do these. I'll just make one called budget. And then another one called inventory. And if I look at budgets and I go to properties and look at security, I have this accounting users group. It's like, oh, I didn't give them rights. You're right, you didn't. They got inherited. There's kind of a neat feature on here as well. If I click on advanced, it not only tells you that you inherited it, but it tells you where you inherited it from. So here you can see accounting users has the modify rights, and when you here only doesn't list them specifically like here. It doesn't say like modified, read, write, execute, whatever. It just tells you modify, knowing that it's modify and everything down. And so you could have write and everything down. And so it's kind of a hierarchy. Modify is the highest one right below full control. This isn't quite the order that they are for precedence or hierarchy. It'd be modify is the full control is the highest, then modify by the next, then write. This would be confusing. Probably read and execute, then read, and then list in folders. I'm going to have to double check those two reads. Usually we have the two reads together though. But if I'm looking at this, I can see that not only do I have the rights, but I get at them from the accounting folder. And it keeps going down deeper than that. Say I take budget and I make a new folder for budget, budget 2017. Didn't put numlock on. And if I right click on here and go to properties and go to security again and click like advanced, I can see the accounting users have the modify rights to this 2017 folder, and they got it all the way from up above in accounting. So it just flows down and makes it easy for granting rights. But there's sometimes we want to limit the rights. Maybe I don't want to have it flow down into each of these. Maybe I don't want all the accounting users to have access to the payables folder, or I don't want everybody in accounting to have the receivables things. Maybe I want them to be more job specific. And that's where we come into blocking inheritance. We can block it. We can say, I don't want anything coming into me. I don't want to get any inherited rights. So we're going to take a look at that. So I'm going to bring up my data one server. And I'm going to go to the payables folder. So I go to payables folder and I click on properties. And I go up to security again. And I do need to use advanced permissions. It's two different systems. I can edit access control lists through here, but I need to do this underneath advanced. There's pros and cons to this. It's different, so it's harder to use, but you have to get into here to disable inheritance. And so what I'm saying here now is when I click on disable inheritance, it's saying, okay, what do you want to do with all that stuff that you're getting inherited? You have two options. One is to convert the inherited permissions into explicit permissions, or remove all the permissions from this object. Flipping back the diagram, it's basically saying, what are you going to do with these accounting users up there? Are you just going to wipe it out completely, or do you want it to be all copied down there? And if you remember, though, there's more things up here than accounting. There is the owner, there's the system, and then there's the administrators. All those things were there as well. So we have administrators, there's the system, and then there's the creator owner. Let's kind of simplify that. What are you going to do with those rights? Well, you could wipe them all out. That's one option, which means that you have a blank access control list and nothing's inherited, so nobody has any rights to it. Well, that's possible, and then you have to start creating the list of things that you want to put in there, like administrators group, like the system, like, you know, the owner, creator owner, and then putting the payables people in there as well. It's much easier to have them like do half the work for you. It's just take all those things and copy them down, but instead of being inherited, they're now explicit because it's actually in the access control list. So creator, owner, system, administrators, and then accounting users. And that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to flip over to my server. I'm going to choose convert these from inherited permissions to explicit permissions. And now if you notice that I still have all the exact same rights, the difference is I'm not inheriting them anymore. They are in the access control list. I'm just going to click OK there, come back to this access control list, which is, I'm way more comfortable in this one. If I click on edit, now if I click on any of these, you notice that these are not grayed out anymore because they're not inherited. I'm specifically granting the rights here. So I blocked the rights and I rewrote the access control list. I blocked it from being inherited, and I just completely rewrote the access control list at that payables level. Now that gives me a lot of control. I already said that I don't want all the accounting users to have access to payables, right? So I want to get rid of them. Who should have access to the payables folder then?
Administrator.
Administrator does. Was you right?
Payables.
The payables people, yeah. And again, simplifying, they should have read-write rights to that folder, right? So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'm going to flip over to my server. And now that payables folder, I need to modify that list. And I'm going to do it right from here. And I'm going to get rid of accounting users. And I want to add the payables. And I don't remember I named them. I must have named them account payables. Accounting payables users. I click OK. I click OK. And I give them modify rights. As soon as I give them modify rights, they automatically get the right as well. I don't give them full control. And I click OK. Take a look at the org chart. Let's just take a look and see how that's going to function if I try to log in as a different people. So I'm going to use accounting data, data 1 server, and try to log into somebody from accounting. Let's see here. I'm going to do, let's see, Daniel. So I'm going to log out as administrator, and I want to log in as Daniel. So I'm going to switch to another user. And I click on my File Explorer. I go to my D drive. Now I'm Daniel, so let me try going to Operations, and I don't have access to Operations. Perfect. I shouldn't have access to Operations. Let me go to Accounting. Looks like I have access to Accounting. Let me go to the Budget folder. Let me try to make a new folder. I always forget that numlock. 2016, so I can create folders. I could probably delete them as well. Yep. And then I go under Payables. Make a new folder. Have a Vendors folder. I can access that just fine. So I am a payables person. I can access things in accounting. I can access things in payables. I haven't done anything in receivables, so it's nothing different from there. Let me log in as somebody that's not part of payables, and that would be Taylor. So I'm going to log in as Taylor now and see if there's any differences. What would you expect to happen? Okay, so again, I don't have access to other departments. I do have access to shared. So if I make a new folder, I can. Party ideas for a corporate party. Yep, works fine. Go to accounting. I can access to accounting. I can go to the budget folder. I too can create folders. Let me try to go to payables, and it says I don't have access to it. I'm not part of payables. You don't have any access to it, and so it's blocking that access. So it's working the way that we want to. Make sure you test very thoroughly, not only that people have the rights that they need to get into a folder, but make sure that they don't have rights in folders as well. So you kind of have to test. You can't test every user in every folder, but you kind of have to strategically test different users for different folders to see how that's all working. So we log in as administrator. Make sure it's GOPA administrator. Go back to server manager. Now I'm just going to very quickly finish up accounting, and I'm going to work with receivables. So I'm going to do the same process I did for payables. So I'm going to go to receivables, go to properties. I'm going to go to security, go to advanced security. I'm going to disable the inheritance, and I can convert them all to explicit permissions. When I'm done, I click OK. And now these are all explicit permissions, so it allows me to edit them. So if I go to edit here, I want to get rid of the accounting users. And I want to add the receivables. So I'm sure they're called accounting receivables users. And then the last step, make sure you actually give them rights. By default, just by adding them to the access control list does not give them all the rights they need. They can see the files, but they can't make any changes to the files or create or delete them. So make sure you click on modify, which then automatically gives them the right as well. And then going ahead and click OK. So I want you to take about 2 or 3 minutes, and then take about 3 minutes. Make those 2 changes for payables and receivables, and then log in as, in my example, I use Daniel and Taylor just to make sure they can get to the right folders and don't have access to the incorrect folders. Yeah, when we think about the manager now, what this accounting manager should, right now, what rights does the accounting manager have to the payables and receivables folders? Nothing. Can't even see them. and can see that they exist, but can't see any contents for them. What's some options that we have? We can leave it that way, right? Right? What's another option we have?
Read only,
We could give them read only. And what's another option?
read and write.
Read and write. So what do you think would be a good balance or a good decision at this point? Why?
So it's not working on it, just has to make sure they're
Yeah, so the manager's going to see what's going on and should really see everything that's going on. But again, if you gave him or her read-write access, that gives one person access to both sides of the accounting system, which that's the single point of failure at this point. And yes, I know administrator does at this point, and this is where we probably secure this more later on in our world. But we're not ready to do that. So looking back at these payables and receivables, I can go to properties and security, and I'd probably want to add the manager in these as well, accounting manager. And when I do that, the default is just to basically give them the read write. So this is read only. That's exactly what you would want them to do. And then if I go to receivables, it goes properties and security, and then add the accounting manager. Again, by default, they would have the read rights to that folder, and that's exactly what we want to give. And I know there's other ways we could have dealt with this. We could have actually put the managers at the level above and let those rights explicitly be copied down, but it ends up being the same thing. So it should have been copied down, or else you're adding it individually. So go ahead, and then afterwards you want to be logging in as Andrew, who is the accounting manager, to make sure that he can see both the contents of both the receivables and payables folders, but that he can't delete or create things in there. Okay, we're going to move on to some other departments. I'm just going to kind of go through these kind of quickly. Just kind of watch, and I'll give you a chance to catch up and do some of the practice on your own as well. We're going to skip the animals. Executive. For the executive folder, we really don't have anything special going on here as far as sub areas. It's just the executive users, and same thing with HR users and information systems. Operations, we have a couple shifts though that we want to deal with. And again, there's multiple ways of dealing with this. Purely for arbitrary reasons, what we're going to do here is we're going to let them see each other, but not be able to access each other's stuff. So they can see the folders and the contents. Hey, what's that third shift doing over there? But you can't mess up their scheduling or, procedures or whatever. But at least you can see the things that are going on. And we're going to do the same thing with sales. So we're in accounting, they can't even see each other's stuff. They're just completely separate. Operations, a little bit more cooperative, being able to see it. And again, there's no right or wrong as far as why we would do that. It just gives you good practice. So I'm going to click on my first shift, and I go to properties, and I go to security. I go to advanced, and then I'm going to disable inheritance, and I'm going to convert it to explicit permissions. This is the same thing we did. And I click OK. Now there's multiple ways of dealing with this, but I'm going to click on edit. And since I want everybody to be able to read it, but not be able to modify this stuff, I'm just going to modify this operations users. I'm not going to delete them. I'm not going to delete them in this case. I did in accounting, but I'm not going to delete them because I want everybody in operations to be able to, I'm going to get rid of modify and write. I'm going to leave them with the three rights that I consider, again, read only. So they can read and execute, list the file contents, and read the files themselves. So I'm going to leave that. So that still means that nobody can write to this directory yet. And so I do want to add the first shift users. I don't know if it's first. No, it must be called operations first. Operation first users, or first shift or whatever you name them, and I want to give them modify rights. And so now I can see that for this this first shift folder, all the operations users can still read it. So that means second and third shift, and the manager can still read here. And then the operations users, the operations first shift users can read and write to that folder. What about the managers at this point? They can have read-only rights because they're part of the whatever, right? So how could I handle this? Well, I could just add the managers in here as well. And again, there's different ways of dealing with this. But let me do the operations manager, and we're just going to decide to do it this way this time. So operations manager. And we, in fact, want to give them, make sure they can read and write to that container. To that folder. Read and write to that folder. And so I go to second shift. I'm going to do the same thing. Properties, security, advanced, disable the inheritance, convert them, and now I'm going to modify the list. The first thing I'm going to do is the operations users. I'm going to take away their modify and write right, and I'm going to add the second shift users, and I'm going to give them, click OK. I'm going to give them modify and write rights. And then I'm also going to be adding the manager in here as well. And then finally at the third shift. Properties, security. You kind of get the feel of these things. After you do one, you're doing another one. It's like, boy, this is, Click edit, operations users, get rid of modify and write, add the operations third shift people. Make sure you click the proper rights on there, that you actually add the rights, and then operations manager I'm going to add as well. Operations manager, and then giving them the modifying right as well. And there's ways of doing that at the operations level and letting it flow down and into it. And so it would just copy down as well. And this is one way of doing it. I'm going to do sales exactly the same way as doing operations. And then we have one more example to do after this then. So I want to do east and west the same way. So right now everybody has access to everything in sales, and I want to modify that. So I'm going to go to advanced. So I'm in the east folder right now. I'm going to disable the inheritance. And right now all the sales users have access to everything, but I want to edit that. Take away the modify and write permission. Get the terminology correct. These are permissions. These aren't rights. These are permissions. And I want to add the sales east people to this. And make sure I give them the modify and write rights. And I also want to put the sales manager in here as well. And the same thing for west. Properties, security, advanced, disable inheritance, convert them, click OK, edit the list, choose the sales users, remove modify and write, add the sales west users, grant them the modify and write, and the sales manager. Of modify and write. So I'll give you like about 10 minutes or so to work with those 5 directories, the 3 in operations and the 2 in sales. You should then be logging in as the managers from each of those. So the operations manager is going to be Sarah. The sales manager is going to be Joshua. And see that you can have access to everything, reading and writing to all those folders. Then try 1 or 2 of the departments. Try somebody in the Western division of sales. Let's see, Western. So that's Ashley, Michael, and Hannah. Log in as any of them. Make sure that you can read and write to the West folder, but that you can read only to the East folder. Don't forget the root folders either. So everybody can still do anything they want in the sales folder. They can make new folders. I don't know, customers. And they can see everything. But the East and West is what we're kind of focusing on. So try it, log in as a couple people, and make sure that they have the correct permissions. So just to give us a little bit more practice and kind of a realistic situation, is for each of these departments, we have a manager, which might have a couple more rights here and there, but maybe there's managerial types of things that managers do. So you might need to have special files kept in for certain locations. Some companies will do that by just give them a home folder, and you just store all your manager stuff in that home folder. Not really a best practice, because those files don't belong to that person. Those files more or less go along with the role of that person. So being a manager, accounting manager, these are files that relate to the manager's position, not to, who's my accounting manager? Andrew. So they're not really related to Andrew, they relate to the accounting manager. As I take people in and out of the roles or that position, it's be really nice for them just to be able to have access to all those manager files instead of like, oh yeah, Andrew has those, let's copy them over, and who has them now, and whatever. So we're gonna deal with that by actually creating a managers folder. So underneath accounting, I'm gonna make another folder, and I'm just gonna call it manager. You could call it manager, accounting manager, or whatever you want. I'm just going to call it manager, so it's in the accounting folder. So here's the manager folder for accounting. I'm going to take that back. I'm just going to name it. I'll name it out. Just make it very, very clear. The accounting manager folder. So that's the accounting manager folder. So right now, who has rights to this folder? All the accounting users, right? Because accounting has... all the accounting people have access to the accounting folder, and that flows down to each of these folders. So I want to block the inheritance from here. Properties, security, we've done this a few times, right? Disable the inheritance, convert it to explicit rights. And I want to get rid of these accounting users completely. I don't want them to have any access to this folder. But I do want the manager, the accounting manager, to have access, well, not full control, but read and write options to that folder. So right now I should have no accounting users listed in here, but I should have accounting manager. Clicking on accounting manager, seeing that I did give read, modify, and write rights in addition to the default read. And we're going to do this to all the departments. Executive, I'm not going to make it an executive manager, though. I'm going to name this folder a president folder. This is specifically to the president. And then, oh, sorry, back up. President, properties, security, and advanced. Disable the inheritance, and then convert those.
What if you select the second option before you go back?
If I select the other option,
Can you actually enable inheritance or no?
I'll cancel.
Okay.
I'll cancel. Okay, so if I click on here and go to properties and go to security and disable inheritance,
Yeah, you go down
I remove all the permissions. That means that no one will have rights to that folder, including the administrators.
Oh, okay.
And while you're in the screen, you can take care of that, so you can give the proper permissions to there. If you don't take care of it at that point, that folder will be there, but no one can delete it, and no one can add to it. No one can do anything. It's called orphaning a folder, and it happens.
Why would you have an option like that anyway?
Why would you have an option that way?
Yeah.
Because they're assuming they know what you're doing, what you're doing.
Okay.
You are the professional, and they're giving you all the control you want. Instead of, we always complain about why is Microsoft only giving these options. I want full control. This is full control. You can choose exactly what you want. Either the default is to convert it to explicit permissions. That's what everybody chooses. But there are times, if you're a really good administrator, you know what you want. It's like, no, I want to get rid of all that stuff, and I will go in and take care of exactly the way that I want to.
All right.
So we're gonna do it this way, though. It's much safer.
Just in case if I do it.
Yeah, if you did it, unfortunately, make sure that you're adding. Don't click OK or Apply until you add somebody having rights to that folder, though. Because if you don't, you'll be stuck. So once you click OK or Apply, then you're done. So and this way, administrators keeps flowing down. That's why I like doing it that way. So executive users has access. I do not want everybody in the executive department to have access to this, so I'm going to remove it. And I'm going to add the president group, or the role of president, into here and giving them rights. Oh, missed the modify. And then click OK. And I do the same thing for HR, IS, operations, sales. I want to do one more here. So I'm going to sort of skip ahead so you can do the managers and the rest of those folders. Say the managers want to get together and work on things. What do they have access to? Well, they have access to their own managers folders, but they don't have any place to cooperatively work for managers. And so if I have ideas in the sales department that might be helpful to HR, where can we put that stuff? Well, right now we can throw it under shared, along with the party ideas and recipes that we're sharing as a company and everything else there. Not very secure because everybody has access to this. So we want to give them a shared, secure area to work with, and that's what we're going to do in the shared folder. So under the shared folder, I'm going to make another folder, and I'm going to call it managers. And this is a full managers folder, but I don't want anybody else to see this and have access to it. So let's just think through this. Let's do the same process. I'm going to go to properties of that managers folder. Click on security again. Advanced, and I want to disable the inheritance. So I don't want it to be down there. So taking a look at this list, I probably want to get rid of domain users. That means that everybody in the domain would have access to this managers folder, and that's not what I want. So I want to get rid of the domain users and click remove. And who would I add then? Managers. And I actually should have a group called managers, which includes all of the managers, and then making sure that they have the modify and then by default the rights, the right permission added to that as well. Playing with one more scenario, throwing out all these different scenarios out here. We want to think about corporate policies. So where do we have the dress code and the attendance policy and the employee employee one thing users guide? That's not true. Handbook. That's it. Thank you. Where would I put that kind of stuff? Well, since looking at these directories, I could put it under HR because they kind of manage it, but then I'd have to give people access to the HR folder, and it's just kind of messy. So shared kind of makes a good place to throw things. So let me just throw my new folder underneath here called policies. And then underneath policies, I might have things like, I don't know, the handbook, employee handbook, maybe a new document called, dress code. Another one called attendance policy. And you don't have to make these specifically, just throwing some stuff in there. So is that a good place to throw that? Who has access to it? Everybody has access to it. That's wonderful, right? So what can people do in that folder then? Oh, they can read and write. So you're saying anybody in the company could change the attendance policy? Yeah, they could. We don't want that to happen. So we're going to modify this folder structure again. So what do you think I should do? What would you suggest?
What's in it again?
This policies has like the handbook, dress
Okay.
code, attendance policy. Who should have access to it?
HR. Well, everybody should have access.
Everybody should have access to. What kind of access do they have?
Just read only.
Read only. Right now they have read rights. We need to change that. So I go to properties, security, advanced, disable inheritance, and then convert it to explicit. So that's the whole steps we do. And so now domain users have all rights or read write rights. We don't want that to be. So we want to edit this. Domain users shouldn't have read write. They should have read only rights. Now we have HR. You mentioned HR. I thought it's a good idea. Now, this is, again, completely arbitrary. This could be done in multiple different ways. Maybe the president would put things out there. Maybe the HR manager would put things out there. We'll just kind of give it generically to the HR users. Anybody in HR can update the policies. We're kind of trusting them or whatever. But this is completely arbitrary. There's no right or wrong. It's how your company implements things. We have a pretty small HR department. We have 3 people. Let them all take care of the handbook and the policies and things. So I'm going to make sure I give them modifying rights to that. So those are the things I'd like you to play with then for the next 10 minutes. Make sure that each department has a managers folder. So HR manager, IS manager, operations manager, sales manager. Make sure that in the shared folder you have a managers folder and a policies folder, and secure them appropriately. Managers, only the managers should be able to see this. Policies, everyone, domain users should have read-only rights, and HR should have read-write rights to it. Login is a different people. Login as Alexis, make sure she can change the files in it. Login as a manager, and Samantha is an IS manager. Make sure that she can log on or have access to the shared managers folder. But even Samantha, she's an IS manager, she shouldn't be able to change the policies. Make sure you're actually logging in as these people on the Data One server to test their access rights.